welcome to the Carter Center. Here at the Carter Center, we wage peace, fight disease, and build hope. That's our mission here. We were founded, of course, by President Carter in the 80s when he envisioned this place as a mini Camp David. And you know, for President Carter, leadership and integrity, a commitment were very important. And that's why I'm delighted personally that General McChrystal is here with us today, because you certainly exemplify all of those things. I'm looking forward to your talk today. And again, welcome you and others here to the center. Thanks again. Thanks.
So thank you all for being here this morning. We know that there is another event later today at Georgia Tech, and this is obviously designed to be more intimate. And I was thinking as I was preparing, do I write a bunch of questions about Iran and we just skip the book? I know that you all, when we get to Q&A, will have an opportunity to ask all of your military-related questions. But the questions that I will be talking to General McChrystal about today are about leadership and character, and I think there's so many ways to talk about global events, current affairs, through the lens of leadership. And so I hope that we can get at that today. If we didn't get a chance to meet this morning, my name is Ricky Bevington. I'm president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And it's great to see all of you this morning on a beautiful Atlanta Monday morning. The mission of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta is to empower Atlanta's leaders and citizens to act with global understanding and trusted international relationships. So it's knowledge, but it's also who you know to help you take action on your knowledge and make a real difference in the world with what you know and who you know. We believe that this will position Atlanta to navigate change, seize opportunity, and shape its global future. We would like to thank today's sponsor, ATL Vets. Thank you to Zach and his team for all of the work that ATL Vets does here in Atlanta. Please also join me in a round of applause for the people whose names we won't see, but there's a lot of people running around who have made this morning possible. Let's recognize them right now. Thank you. A bit of housekeeping. The statements made today are those of the speaker and not of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. After our dialogue, we will open the floor to questions. There's a microphone here. And now to introduce our speaker. After 34 years of service in the U.S. Army, Stanley McChrystal retired as a four-star general. He was commander of the International Security Assistant Forces in Afghanistan and previously served as commander of the nation's premier counterterrorism force, the Joint Special Operations Command. The author of My Share of the Task, Team of Teams, Leaders, and Risk, and now, of course, the book we'll be discussing today. He currently lives in Alexandria, Virginia with his wife, Annie. Annie, thank you so much for joining us this morning. General McChrystal is the founder and CEO of McChrystal Group, a leadership consulting firm that helps enable teams to operate with greater speed and adaptability. Please join me in welcoming General Stanley McChrystal. Testing, testing, great. So, the title of the book, of course, we will start with character. I think that I was thinking, how do you ask somebody how they define character? So here's how I would like to phrase this question. What does character mean in leadership? What does it mean in practice? And when was yours first tested?
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of background on thinking about character before I admit anything about when mine was tested. Character is who we are. At the end of the day, it's the essence of us. Heraclitus said, character is our fate, and I think that's true. Tom Paine said, reputation is what men think of us. Character is what gods and angels know of us. Now, I think character is reflected in what we do. Not what we say, not what we write, not what we pretend. It's what we actually do. And that becomes much more complicated than simply saying, I have good character, I have bad character, because We have to test ourselves against how we reacted to the events of life, how we were in the moments that were unexpected and difficult, and then how we were when we were on top of the world and we had the opportunity to exercise influence and power. And we all, in some way or another, at times are in a position where we can treat people well or not treat people well. Now, I have broken down character to a mathematical equation. Character equals conviction times discipline. What I mean by that is we all have convictions. Those are the things we believe, not just the things we casually believe because somebody said so. They are the deeply held beliefs that we're willing to live to or die for. But they by themselves don't mean that much because a lot of people can have great convictions, but if we don't have the discipline, and I think a subset of that discipline is personal courage, we don't have the discipline to live to them, all of it's meaningless because anything times zero is zero. And so when I think about character on an individual level, it's a journey. At least for me, it was a journey. I grew up with great parents. My father was a soldier. My mother was from the South. They met down at Fort Benning, Georgia, right at the end of World War II. Had 6 kids. He went through Korea and Vietnam twice. But I never saw my parents, either of them, do anything wrong. And when I say that, they never took a parking space they shouldn't have. They never kept change they shouldn't have from a store clerk. Now, they may have fought. I never saw them fight. My mother died, sadly, when she was still young at 45, and my father was 6 kids. A relatively young brigadier general was devastated. But the reality was they shared something that was an example. Now, they didn't spend a lot of time talking to the 6 kids about character. They didn't preach to us. They just lived it. And so they were an exemplar of that. And so when you get that kind of opportunity, and then, of course, you go through school. I had great opportunities there. And then I went to West Point where they very overtly try to teach you character with all of the statues and pictures around. And they put historical figures up, most former military, most graduates of West Point. And they're trying to tell you, here are examples you can follow. And they weren't perfect, but the whole message was you can be good. And we had a very strict honor code. A cadet does not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. And that's a high bar because if you find out someone you knew and liked a lot lied, if you don't turn them in, you are thrown out. Now that's a difficult thing. And they were, at the time you think, well, they're trying to make all cadets honest. That was not the point at all. The point was try to plant inside every cadet a set of values that over a lifetime would grow and they would become your habit, who you are. So, Ricky, to get to your question, my character was tested a number of times, and as is everybody's. The biggest, most memorable for me came when I left the service. John will remember. Paige will remember. I had been in the Army for 34 years. I had been in command in Afghanistan for a year. And a magazine article came out in Rolling Stone magazine that basically depicted my command team as being dismissive of Vice President Biden particularly, but other leaders. I didn't think it was fair or accurate, but it doesn't matter. I'm responsible. I'm in charge, and an article came out. There was a bombshell on President Obama's desk. Remember, he's still a fairly young president at that point. There was a lot of back talk about the military had influenced too much power, particularly in Iraq. And then now we are in Afghanistan, and you've got this general who's depicted as being dismissive. So I fly back from Afghanistan to meet with the president, go into the room, and he was good. I mean, we always got along. We still do. He asked me what happened. I said, I don't know what happened. I mean, this is only 24 hours after this article came out. I don't think my team's that way, but Mr. President, here's my resignation. And if you want to accept it, I'm fine. If you want me to go back and continue commanding, I'm fine too. Whatever's best for the mission. And he accepted my resignation. In an instant, things changed for me. I was born in an Army hospital. I went to West Point at age 17. I had been a soldier all my life. I identified with being a soldier. And in a second, I'm not a commander anymore. I'm not a general. I'm not even a soldier. So you walk out of a room like that, and it's surreal, and you're disoriented, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what just happened? And I drove across Washington, D.C. to where Annie was living at Fort McNair. And I had been gone for 6 of the previous 7 years. And I'd flown back all night to get to that meeting. So I get back I reach back to the quarters. I walk in, and Annie comes out of the kitchen area and right inside the front door, and I said, Annie, it's over. He accepted my resignation. And she looked at me and she said, good. We've always been happy and we'll always be happy. And so what she did was she set a direction for me. We had 2 choices at that point, or it felt binary. I could either be a bitter old general who felt like he got a raw deal, and I could get taken to lunch a lot of times on that probably. But the reality is hating is as energy consuming as not. And so we made a decision in that moment to face forward. And I tell people Annie was a perfect partner because she lives life like she drives with no use for the rearview mirror. But the reality is what we did was we just set a decision and said, we're going to try to live in ways that if people never had met me before, but they read that article, they'll go, wow, that doesn't seem like what I read. If they had known me and they believed in me, they go, Stan is the person that I thought he was. And if you have some kind of a standard that you give to yourself for your character, what are the forcing functions that remind you to be better? And we still need them. I'm 71 now, and I'm still working on my character. But it gets easier because I realize more and more how important it is. Sorry for the soliloquy.
No, it's beautiful, and it really sets up the rest of the conversation, which is how leaders handle those moments, right? And so there are moments when leaders do sadly abandon the values that they know they're right. Why do they do this?
Yeah, if we're in a warm, dry place, it's very easy to say, when that comes up, I'm going to do the right thing. 1, I will know what the right thing is, and 2, I will do it. First, I would tell you, sometimes what the right thing is not completely clear. John would know this, and there's great pressure sometimes. If you go into the Oval Office for a meeting, the president has ultimate home field advantage. And everybody else in there tries to act like you are the imposter and that they go there 3 times a day, and some of them do. And so they're sort of comfortable in all that extent. You've been brought in, and you've been brought in for a reason. They want your opinion on something. And you realize sometimes that they have a different view, many of them, maybe not all of them, they have a different view. So you think, well, I'm just going to tell them what I think. Then you go, no, wait a minute. It's a bunch of smart people. They might be right. Second, I want to be invited back. I want to be on the team. I want to be loyal. And so I want to say things that are helpful, not upsetting to people. And so you feel this tremendous sort of gravitational pull. But then you have to remember, that's not why you're in the room. You're in the room to tell them what you think. They don't need you in the room if they can just assume you're going to nod your head for what they think. And so I think leaders often feel that pressure. And then finally, we have this tendency to rationalize. If you're a corporate leader, and I have a company of my own, And what I say and do, I realize can impact the 100 people that work for me. So I can be in a position where I go, I think this, but maybe I won't say it, or I won't do anything, or I won't stand up and be counted. Or the old shareholder argument, you can't do it because you will hurt shareholder value. I would argue that we put leaders in positions not simply to be a conduit for shareholder sentiment, but to actually be leaders. And if they don't have values and they're not willing to stand up for those values, now you don't have to lead with your chin, but if you're not willing to stand up for the values, you probably shouldn't be a leader. You ought to be something else. But it is much harder than from the sidelines we can often pretend.
We are going to go to questions in just a moment, and there's a microphone, so you can, I guess, stand up and line up behind the microphone. I would ask folks to keep your question very brief and simple. But just to wrap up our portion of this, General, what decision-making blind spot do you see that global crises that we've been discussing this morning, we see in the news over and over and over again? And how can leaders in this room guard against that blind spot before it shows up in their organization?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of them, but I'll hit the biggest one. Military deception. If you ever heard of military deception planning, it is trying to get the enemy to do something that gives you an advantage. And you try to create in their minds the conclusion that you're going to do something, that then you do something different. What we learn over time through history is you're never going to convince them of something that they don't already sort of want to believe. And so what you've got to do is create a scenario where they think you're going to do something because it makes great sense. And what you have to do is reinforce for them, yep, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And then you've got to do something different than that. I think blind spots in corporations and every organization, we have this sort of predetermined impression of what the situation is and what will work. And we look for information. It's called confirmation bias. We look for information to reinforce that, and we find it. And then we put together what sounds like a credible argument. This is the situation, what we ought to do. And quite often it turns out to be very wrong. Leaders really need to watch that. There's a process called red teaming. And the guy who wrote the book, Red Team, works in our company. But it's pressure testing your thinking and your plan. It's finding out where the holes are. Any system you can do, because once you fall in love with your plan, it's probably wrong.
Please introduce yourself, and again, a very brief question so we can make sure everybody gets a chance.
This is Khwaja Sheikh, IBM CTO for the industry market. Thank you, Stan, for sharing your wisdom here on character and values. The 2026 Edelman Barometer on trust came out, where it talked about how the trust in the institutions is eroding, where the business has to play a leadership role to ensure they broker the trust. From your experience, what advice would you offer, whether it is to the business roundtable or to the CEOs or to the board directors, how they can play a critical role to move away from the insular world towards more in this interconnected world that we are living in? As you might have seen, there are some, basically, the industry is not taking leadership role. What advice you have?
Yeah, not everyone here will agree with this, I imagine, but I think industry is harder than it's ever been. And in this particular environment now with media, social media, all the different forces, industry has got to become viewed as predictable and reliable. So if we think about it, if a company has programs, and we'll use DEI programs as an example, when those were popular, people implemented a lot of them. As soon as people started to criticize, you had many companies walk away from them very quickly. If you're an employee in that company, you may have gone to the company partially for that reason. And if you feel like the organization is going to shift dramatically based on pressures, then your trust is much, much weaker. If you ever worked for a boss who is influenced by the last person in the room, what you find is every business meeting doesn't mean that much because people go, the decisions in here won't hold if somebody else gets in the room. So you've got to create the feeling that people can rely on you as a person, as a leader, but also on the firm, because there's a big cost paid over time for being too malleable. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm PJ Bain. General McChrystal, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. You've talked a lot about how you make decisions with with your values and with your discipline, and you've done a phenomenal job of breaking it down to a formula. So I'm looking for a formula. And you've made some incredibly challenging decisions in the face of limited information and changing information. And that's really the nature of my question. How do you decide to make a decision when you only have partial information that you know is probably clouded by chaos and the fog of war and the fog of people that may have a vested interest in the information that's getting to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing is you have to identify what decision you actually need to make. What are we deciding here? And you have to understand that no decision is often a decision by itself. But decide what it is you're deciding and if it needs to be made and who needs to make it. The second is deciding when that decision has to be made. Because everybody would like to wait until they get more and more information so that they can mitigate the risk to zero. You see a lot of leaders doing that. The problem is the opportunity typically passes or the risk hits before that occurs. So if the leader understands those two key things, what's a decision, when does it need to be made, to give time for it to be implemented and be effective, you're partway there. Then you got to decide who needs to be in that decision, who needs to provide critical information. If you have a fast-moving crisis, you may not be able to include that many people. If you've got more time, typically good processes go out and they gather as much as you can. Now, we sometimes do that for small decisions, and it really just gums up the organization. But the reality is, for big decisions, get yourself informed as you can. And then finally, the leader has got to say, at a certain point, I have to decide, and they got to be disciplined enough to make the decision. It can be a little frightening at that point because you want to know just a little bit more, but you can't. And then also, you got to understand some decisions are at least partially reversible. Even if you decide to invest a bunch of money in your company or in something by your company, it doesn't mean you can't get part of that wrong and then survive part of it if conditions change. Thank you very much.
General, thank you for your service, but beyond that, I think you deserve to hear on a regular basis how many people you've inspired and continue to inspire. So thank you for your service and for the inspiration. I work at a university. It's not a West Point. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are with respect to bringing character and honor to university students when you don't have the closed system and the coercive environment that you have at West Point. If you were made a university president, and to parrot one of your early questions, you can't leave until they get it right. What would you want to do at a university to impart character and honor?
You know, it's interesting, and Larry, thanks for the kind words and thanks for the question. I went and did an event at Catholic University in D.C. a few years ago, and the president was saying one of the challenges is they don't have control over the students enough to be held responsible for things like alcohol usage and whatnot. If you don't have the ability to set rules, then you don't have the ability really to be responsible for those. I think that our education right now needs a relook because we've gone into a period when we're going to let everybody at a pretty young age make their own decisions and whatnot. The problem is at that age, I wasn't making great decisions. I desperately needed a West Point to set some boundaries, and I could still make enough mistakes within those boundaries. I think we need to not be shy about it because right now we're shy to talk to people about character. We're very reticent to say somebody has lousy character or to look somebody in the eye and go, your character's not living up to what we need. Because you think, well, I don't want to be judgmental or something. Society has got to be judgmental to a point. There have to be things that are viewed commonly as right and wrong. Now, they don't have to be a corseted, tight, narrow, everybody does the same. But there have to be things that are out of bounds because it protects the rest of us. And so I think that we in education really need to be more demanding of students in that way. And I would argue for, you know, not every place needs to be a West Point with as much coercive power as that have, but things that actually make people perform and live within certain standards. Thank you.
Good morning, General Ricky. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm curious, where do you see the biggest disconnect today between policymakers and how they approach conflict versus how it actually plays out on the ground?
Yeah, I think one of our challenges is, and politics have always infected policy and foreign policy, for sure. But we used to have a saying that said domestic politics stop at our shores. And we had a group of long-serving professionals in the State Department, USAID, all the different parts of it, that pretty much exercised that. Not 100%, but pretty well. When we let politics sort of wag the dog on these, one, our policies do this, and we are less trustworthy because our allies go, well, I'm just going to wait until the next administration and all this will change. I think that's very much unfortunate. And so this goes back to the decades, not deals. Things in foreign policy particularly play out over quite a while, and you build them brick by brick. And so knocking them down is counterproductive, in my view. Thank you.
Good morning, General McChrystal. Thank you for you and your wife, Annie's service. My question is more in the business realm. As a business owner who employs 100 people and having sat on a board, my interest in disability advocacy, what advice would you have for me when I speak to business owners and leaders on advocating for job opportunities for people with disabilities? What should I keep in mind when starting those conversations? Thank you.
Yeah, Ivy, thank you. And I understand your perspective, and I think it's great. I'm going to talk about the military, but it applies everywhere. The reality is, in our military right now, only a tiny percentage are ever going to take a rifle and a bayonet and kick open a door and shoot somebody. It's just not, that's not the world anymore. The reality is that most of the people are going to perform things like cyber, or they're going to fly drones, or they're going to do logistics, which have nothing to do with the size of your biceps or the strength of your legs or anything like that. But we have a legacy of thinking that military members have to look and act a certain way. And we feel good about that if they are sort of, the whole idea of uniforms is everybody looks the same. And so you feel good if everybody in the thing looks the same. But that's not the way the military is, because you have to have people with this range of capacities, backgrounds, all these kinds of things. And this gets to disabilities. I agree with the fact that they are starting the draft registration up again. I actually think we should have a draft again. And it would draft from everybody, male, female, disabled, and not. Unless you are so disabled that it's just not possible, most people who are disabled can perform as long as we fit the conditions to that. And I just think that business is in the same place. But they got to think about it. Remember, we grew up in an era where we just sort of didn't. Most of the disabled weren't visible to us all the time. So you didn't have a sense of how much talent's on the sideline. And in today's world, I don't think we can afford that. Thanks, Ivy.
Good morning, General McChrystal. I'm Adria. It was good to meet you, and I'm excited for our day at Tech. When I think about these advancements in technology, especially AI, I'm curious about how you see AI's impact in leadership, especially business leadership. I'm sure you see it, and what your role is today.
Yeah, thanks. And it's still playing out, but we're doing a lot of work in it, so I'm starting to develop opinions. First is, leaders have a harder job now because AI is going to provide both information and potential decisions that you can't understand how they arrived at. The box is going to gather data you don't understand. It's going to do things, and it's going to go, this is the right answer. And before, there were limited amounts of data. You knew the process. You were probably experienced in that industry. And so you could go, okay, I agree with that, or I don't agree with it. Now you're going to have very powerful systems say you need to do A. And you're going to go, well, I hope it's right. So what do? If you delay decisions until what we talked about earlier, you'll be punished in the marketplace. If you make decisions strictly on this, a couple of things happen. One, may work out, it may be wrong. The second is, pretty soon people are going to go, why do we need you? And so I think we're going to enter a period where decision-making in business will be greatly improved by the ability to access more data, the ability to consider more things. But it's not going to become this crystal clear right answer. And because there's so many variables, as you know, the theory of complexity is certain things are impossible to predict. I think that's going to be a lot of the factors. And then when you step back and go, if everybody else is using AI, their systems, we're seeing this in markets right now, your AI system is competing with their AI system, and the reality is it produces new dynamics in the marketplace. And we don't completely understand them yet. I'm not sure we ever will. Thank you.
Morning, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Menike, Georgia State ROTC PMS. My question, in your book, you talk a lot about getting outside your bubble and talking to people, regardless of what walk of life they're from, age, everything like that. But also, what I want to know is, as a leader, a lot of times we get stuck in just talking to those people around us. So from your perspective, how do you make sure that you talk to people from different walks, and how can we as leaders make sure that we're engaging those people? What are your recommendations to try and make sure?
Yeah. It is, you're in an important job, and thanks for doing that. And I imagine it takes an awful lot of your focus. So for me to tell anybody to go out, you to go talk to people on the street and whatnot, when are you going to do it? Plus, who's going to provide the venue to have you just stop people and say, hey, what do you think? So this is where it gets complicated. When you're very senior, like the president, you can bring experts in and you can go out and talk. That doesn't apply to the rest of us. I think it starts with using as big a spread of media products as you can from credible ones, so that you're first looking at what reporters say, because actually the press does the best job still of sort of bringing things together. Well, they do. It's not perfect, but they do. We found in Afghanistan, we had all this secret intelligence, and it was always less accurate and less value than what came from open source. And one, because secret stuff comes from spies who lie all the time. And so going out and engaging with people gives you a better sense. But I think you do media, you try not to be in your own echo chamber. Don't just hang out all the time with the people that you like and automatically agree with you. But I like the fact that you're sensitive, that you don't have all the inputs you probably would benefit from. James.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words today. I would like to ask you more about deciding the metrics of your character, especially in today's world. It's ever more complicated. We operate in shades of gray. Society demands people want to see what they want to see. They want to hear what they want to hear. And if you want to be successful in this reality, you kind of have to play the game a little bit. But how do you play the game and be a person of character? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. I've been doing a lot of reading since I retired, and some of it's just straight philosophy, because we're not the first generation to have to wrestle with these things. If you go back and look at what some of the really great philosophers said, it makes you think. The second thing is I think biography works really well. I'm just finishing a 4-volume set written by Douglas Southwell Freeman on Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee's a complicated character. And he grew up right near my house, and I went to Washington Lee High School, and I lived in Lee Barracks at West Point, and he was always this iconic figure. But he tried to destroy the United States of America. As a general, he is the single commander that killed the most American soldiers. That's an interesting. Now, but was he an evil guy? I don't think so. I think he was a person who wrestled with really hard decisions, and I think he got some of them completely wrong. So I think getting the metrics right, I think we have got to have a set of values that we not only believe, but we constantly test, because they will not be as simple as you like. You know, I tell people I don't believe in torture of detainees. But if you go back to that scenario I used to do with my Yale class, I would bring them in and I'd say, okay, here's the situation. Your family lives in Boston. There is a weapon of mass destruction that's been brought by terrorists there, and we've captured this person, and we believe they know where it is, and it is supposed to go off in X hours. Would you torture them? And this is Yale students, you know, pretty liberal place. And most of every class would go, oh yeah, absolutely, right away. And I say I'm against torture, but I've never been in that situation. And if I was in that situation, I might absolutely react that way. So is my response, I believe in torture some of the time? So it's constantly pushing those things without finding yourself rationalizing and allowing yourself to do everything you'd really like to do.
General McChrystal, good morning. It's a pleasure to have you here and to meet you, sir. My name is Octavio Lorenzo. We met briefly earlier, and the founder of ATL Vets, who sponsored the event, tried to poison you against me because I'm in the Navy, and he, you know, already that started on a bad foot. But nonetheless, we're starting a leadership institute with ATL Vets to service the vets of Georgia and also throughout the United States eventually. And so part of that is going to be a men's and a women's program for leadership and self-development. And so I love when you touched on a couple of questions of leadership, particularly philosophy. And so we're in the final stages of developing that program. And so I wanted your thoughts on maybe 1 to 3 thoughts that you thought, you know, for a veteran leaving the service and the great sacrifice I think that our service members make. 1 to 3 ideas of you really should touch on these, Octavio. Don't forget that these are some of the ways that our men and women can be brought back and also made anti-fragile to what life is outside of the service. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things about the military is when you're brought in, the Army calls it soldierization. They cut your hair off, they take your clothes away, they give you a different name, they teach you to walk and talk differently. And that's all to change, to get you out of your civilian habits so that you are more able to be shaped for what the military needs for a soldier. And it's pretty comforting once you're in the Army because it's pretty clear. You know, you do this, you don't do this. An old sergeant major of mine had a great thing. He says, the Army only asks you to make 2 decisions, to enlist and to re-enlist. They tell you everything else. And that's largely true. When you're a civilian, there's not the same set of values of the United States Army. There's not the same automatic discipline. There's not the same uniform code of military justice that provides you a railroad track that you run down. So I think if I was going to take veterans, one of the first things that happen is they come out and they've gotten used to and comfortable with that. They may have not liked some of the discipline, et cetera, but the reality is it's pretty comfortable. It's pretty clear. I think you start by having them figure out where do they fit in now? What is it they're about to be? They've always been, but now they're going to be a citizen. What is that? What is a good citizen? What defines it? What are the responsibilities of being a good citizen? Where does it begin? Where does it stop? Because without some kind of metric that defines that, then they have to look for others. And the next one might be, well, how much money do I have? Because that's maybe what their peers done. I mean, we've got some metrics in our society that are a little perverse because they really incentivize bad behavior. Last Friday night, we had a celebration of life for a guy that I've known for 46 years, and he served in the Army and then in several different government agencies, and he died pretty unexpectedly about 2 weeks ago, and we had this turnout for the celebration of life of all the people he touched. Now, this was a guy who'd made some mistakes in life, but in reality, the people were there because what he had found over a lifetime was, where do I fit in? What's my contribution? And so you start with that idea of citizenship, and then you start to say, what is my contribution? What am I trying to get or to be? And I would argue this guy didn't make a ton of money. He worked in the government his whole life. But most of us would love to see that kind of turnout after we die with affection and respect, because it would mean we got a lot of things right. And, you know, it goes with what they can do for others. That's my initial thoughts. Thank you.
General, I'm Charles Shapiro, and former State Department guy. And one of the things that the military does so much better than State Department does is take people from mid-level to senior level. I mean, we've all, you know, I've worked with embassies around the world, worked with a lot of majors who tell you, oh, I'm a great tank driver, and they're focused on their military job that's in front of them. And yet somehow, 15 years later, the people who get to the top have a broader view and have become scholar warriors, diplomats, all wrapped into one. How do y'all do that?
Yeah, the military is a leadership development machine. That's what it does. We think it fights our wars. Everyone who comes in the military has never been in the military before, by definition. So it knows it's got to start you, whether you're an officer or a soldier, from the lowest level, and it's got to do it. The military spends an extraordinary amount of its time and resources in that ladder of development. In my career, they spent money for 4 years at West Point. Then they sent me to a series of schools after that that were almost another year. Then 4 years later, they sent me to another 6-month school. And then 5 or so years later, they sent me to another year-long school. They sent me to Harvard, or they sent me to the Navy War College for a year. And then I went off, did some jobs, and they would send you to short courses between. Then they sent me to Harvard for a year, did another job. Then they sent me to the Council on Foreign Relations for a year. So if you do the calculation, probably do the math, 8 or so years of my 34 years, I'm in school when that's my whole focus. I don't have to do it at night or part-time or anything like that. Almost none of the other U.S. government agencies enjoy that opportunity. You're not manned to it because the military is a certain percentage of the force that is always calculated to be in school. And every time they back away, they find problems. So I think it's that. The CIA is the same way. CIA, you train a person to be a case officer or something. If they turn out to be a good leader later, it's just serendipitous. It's not because we took. The military's great genius is it takes average talent and gets above average performance out of it. It's not the superstars, but all you need is that above average and you're pretty good. Thank you.
It's appropriate that our last question will come from John Teehan, who's an honorary director of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, and who actually is who invited General McChrystal to Atlanta. So could we please give John and John gets the last question.
Thanks very much, Ricky. Stan, again, great. Thanks for coming not only to the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, but actually having here at the Carter Center. Barbara Smith did a great job of hosting us here today. Paige Alexander couldn't be here, but also speaking on as a board member of the Carter Center as well. Thank you on behalf of Jason Carter, who's the chair of the Carter Center. My question is, and I have obviously a lot of inside information. I've read your books. I've read all of your books several times. I won't talk about all of the great stories you talk about Annie, and she knows what I'm talking about here because I'm sure she's read it. Maybe she didn't approve everything that you said necessarily. But one of the things that you speak a lot of, and you do a lot of, is you speak on behalf of national service as a concept. You've done a great job today of setting up some pretty scary things, but also giving us some solutions. Is national service an opportunity to help bridge the gaps that we have here in the United States of America, whatever those gaps are, the way you define them? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, John, for everything, but also, we didn't plant that question, but John and I are aligned on this, so I'm going to be saying what I think he completely agrees with. National service is probably the single thing I think we could do that would make the biggest difference. When I talk national service, I'm not talking about military service for everyone. We don't need everybody in the military. National service would be going into conservation, healthcare, whatever. No, I think it needs to be a year of full-time service at a minimum. It can't be just Saturday mornings doing stuff. It's got to be something you are immersed in for a significant period of time. Because the purpose is not what you do, it's who you become. It's becoming a better citizen. If you think about it, anything you contribute to, you feel like you're a shareholder of. We don't ask Americans to contribute anything. Being a citizen, almost all of us are citizens by accident of birth. We pay our taxes, we may vote, 65% of us may vote. But the reality is the rest of us just get it. And so you don't value it as highly if you haven't had to work for it, if you haven't had to give something. Also, the reality is almost every young person could use a year of doing something that's maybe inconvenient, maybe distasteful, maybe frightening. I mean, think back to all of us in our lives. We go, boy, I hated that, but you know, it's good for me. And I think that creating that opportunity for young people, not something we're going to all put them in chain gangs for a year and cut grass, but have them do things as substantive as we can shape so that they come out of that experience where everyone has shared it, not in the same place. But when two people get together, if you ever deal with Israelis, they disagree on most things, but they will agree on their service. And they will start the conversation, what brigade were you in? Because most of it's military. Just being able to say, where did you serve? Well, I taught school in New Orleans. I did conservation out west. I did so-and-so. Would give everybody a common thread that I think would stretch across zip codes, across genders, across political backgrounds. Right now, we have nothing that pulls us together. If you are of a certain kind of background, etc., you can go through life without ever dealing with somebody different. You can watch your own media, you shouldn't even know what they're seeing. And if we don't address that, then I think we have the risk of becoming even more divided. Thank you, John.
Please join me in a round of applause for General Stanley McChrystal. It is my pleasure to present you with a World Affairs Council of Atlanta tie, and it has little globes on it.
That's so thoughtful. You noticed I wasn't wearing a tie.
No, you've earned it, the right not to wear a tie. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to invite our Georgia State ROTC folks to come up and meet the General, since you didn't have an opportunity earlier. And Shay, if we could allow them to do a photo. And other than that, he's got to rush off to Georgia Tech. But one more round of applause for General Stanley McChrystal. Thank you.